They say the sky was once believed to be an immaculate vault, forever blue and eternally aloof from our earthly concerns. But imagine being told that high above us, swirling in those shining heights, there is a hidden ballet of life, a trillion upon trillion of microscopic organisms, each quietly influencing the clouds that, in turn, regulate our planet's climate. The mere thought of it can be staggering. Today, we will peel back the layers of this astonishing truth, exploring a saga in which airborne bacteria, oceanic plankton, and even forest scents shape the weather above our heads, and quite possibly our entire future on Earth. How on earth, you might ask, can something invisible orchestrate the biggest blankets in the sky? In this deep investigation, prepare to discover how scientists have flown mere 1,000 feet above Australia's Great Barrier Reef, with planes that can literally smell the vapors rising from the sea, how curious experiments at a top physics laboratory in Switzerland are helping to synthesize tiny seeds of clouds, and why the future of climate science hinges on solving this puzzle of living particles in the atmosphere. This is the dramatic heart of our exploration, and in the process, we will unravel key questions. Is it possible for microscopic algae to regulate the world's temperature? Can swirling bits of sea spray or forest-scented vapors actually make or break the intensity of climate change? And most of all, how do these revelations drastically shift our understanding of what might happen in the decades ahead? The stage was set for an entirely new perspective back in the late 1980s, when a group of scientists proposed a bold idea known as the claw hypothesis, named after the initials of its authors. The claim was startling. Those tiny algae in the ocean, known as phytoplankton, could produce a sulfurous gas that rose into the air to help produce clouds. In essence, the microscopic life that flourished under the bright sun would exhale chemicals into the atmosphere, allowing new clouds to brew and spread like protective parasols, dimming the sunlight that algae so desperately need for photosynthesis. As the plan went, once these watery creatures were deprived of enough sunlight, they would cease producing the very gas that led to cloud formation, allowing the sky to clear again, thus suggesting a miraculous balancing act orchestrated by life itself. At first, many felt this was merely a fringe concept, life controlling Earth's thermostat with invisible exhalations. Yet, as data trickled in over the years, more and more studies uncovered the astonishing ways in which biology influences cloud formation. We now know that living organisms can emit special gases, produce aerosol particles, and even launch fragments of genetic material high into the sky. The notion that invisible substances from algae, forests, and countless other sources could flourish among clouds is no longer the stuff of speculation. In fact, new research has lifted this idea from a footnote in environmental science classes to a front and center position in climate science conferences. Imagine flying low over the shimmering waters of the Great Barrier Reef on a bright January day. That reef, teeming with coral and fish and plankton, is mostly concealed beneath the ocean surface. Yet, if you are Martin Heinrizi, an atmospheric scientist at Goethe University Frankfurt, you know that something quite special is drifting upward. With the help of specialized instruments that sniff out molecular particles, Heinrizi's research plane can capture the signature of invisible chemicals. These chemicals rise from microscopic algae, ocean spray, and the restless life cycle of marine organisms. And once in the air, they can help birth entire cloud systems. Now, let's be clear about clouds for a moment. White fluff drifting across a summer sky might not seem like a life or death matter, but clouds are a powerful gatekeeper for the planet's temperature. When they hang at low altitudes, they strongly reflect sunlight away from Earth's surface, providing a cooling effect. But if they form higher in the troposphere, they can trap more heat. And so the question becomes, how does life tilt this delicate balance? Are we on the brink of discovering that, far from being passive bystanders, forests, reefs, and almost every living thing on the planet is partly responsible for steering global temperatures? Here, it might be tempting to assume that the only major contributors to clouds are dust storms, like those massive dunes flung skyward from the Sahara, or chemical pollutants from factories spewing into the atmosphere. Indeed, gas and pollution have long been recognized as cloud seeds, or aerosols, enabling water molecules to condense and form droplets. Yet it turns out that oceans, plants, and microbial communities also produce surprising amounts of these aerosol particles. Over the last several years, scientists have uncovered evidence that the contributions of living organisms may be far more substantial than anybody had initially predicted. This discovery has sent ripples of excitement through the atmospheric science world, not to mention a renewed sense of urgency for climate modelers who must incorporate these newfound realities into ever more complex simulations. One of the more dramatic aspects of this research involves something called ice nucleating particles. Normally, for water to freeze in the atmosphere, temperatures have to drop to around -36 degrees Fahrenheit. That is biting cold indeed. But if biological materials from the ocean or from plants are present, in the form of proteins, organic molecules, or remnants of microscopic life, ice crystals can form at far warmer temperatures, sometimes around 5 degrees Fahrenheit. The presence of these biological particles, then, can accelerate the process by which a cloud goes from a puffy cluster of water droplets to an icy, translucent shape drifting at lofty altitudes. Meanwhile, the type of cloud that precipitates from these interactions is crucial for the overall energy balance of the planet. Liquid clouds, in general, block more incoming solar energy than ice clouds do, but ice clouds have their own intricate effects, sometimes letting more solar radiation pass while still retaining heat beneath them. Either way, every shift in the proportion of liquid versus ice in these atmospheric blankets can tweak the planet's temperature dial. This is exactly why scientists like Catherine Moore of the University of Maryland, College Park, are so committed to understanding the microphysics of clouds. She has explained that having even a small influx of these biologically driven ice nucleating particles can radically alter the entire makeup of a cloud, sometimes turning it from a predominantly watery mass to a swirling congregation of ice. And let us not forget the wonders of the ocean's sea surface microlayer, lovingly described by researchers as a gunky film of organic matter that is especially prevalent where waves break. This layer contains proteins, fats, and decomposing microbes in abundance. Every year, when storms and winds whip up the ocean, bits of this microlayer get hurled into the atmosphere. As a result, we find plenty of biological particles riding along on sea spray, reaching altitudes much higher than one might assume for such tiny fragments of matter. The more scientists study this phenomenon, the clearer it becomes that these living or once living particles have too large a role in cloud formation to be ignored. I know what you might be asking. If this is so massively important, how come we are only just hearing about it? The answer can be partially traced to groundbreaking experiments at CERN, a legendary physics laboratory in Switzerland. While CERN is most widely known for epic discoveries in particle physics, in 2009, a group of researchers there built a state-of-the-art system to study how clouds form. Imagine a sealed chamber where the atmosphere is recreated in miniature. Scientists can then pump in trace gases from, say, pine forests or the ocean. By doing so, they can replicate how molecules in the real world collide and cluster in the sky. This cloud chamber at CERN has produced some of the most spectacular new discoveries about what kinds of molecules spur the formation of cloud seeds. Monoterpenes, the compounds responsible for the zesty scent of pine needles, are among the star players in forested regions. These molecules will oxidize, hooking together to form larger particulate matter in the air. As soon as those particles grow to about 50 nanometers or so, the approximate width of certain viruses, they can act as platforms for water vapor to condense. And once enough condensation happens, voila, you have the birth of a cloud droplet. Meanwhile, isoprene gas, also emitted by trees, can behave in ways that scientists are only beginning to piece together. Though isoprene is the second most abundant hydrocarbon in Earth's atmosphere, after methane, it has proven unpredictable. New experiments suggest that even modest amounts of isoprene can, under particular circumstances, dramatically boost the formation of cloud seeds. By the way, if you find these hidden connections as exhilarating as I do, feel free to let your enthusiasm show by giving a quick nod of support and sharing. After all, countless people still have no idea that the ocean, trees, and invisible bits of life might play an active role in regulating our skies. When fascinating ideas come to light, it can only help to spread them. Of course, all of these revelations lead us to an equally thrilling question. How do we incorporate this complexity into our climate models? Xiaohong Liu, an expert in atmospheric modeling at Texas A&M University, points out that the atmosphere can be mathematically described by a series of equations, which scientists then feed into gigantic computer simulations. Historically, these models had to be somewhat simplistic. You just cannot represent every cloud, tree, or microbe in a global climate model that divides Earth into large squares, each perhaps 100 kilometers wide. The calculations would overwhelm even our most powerful supercomputers if we included every nuance. Yet, as technology grows more robust and our knowledge of these living influences matures, modelers have begun painting a more detailed picture. They now try to capture the synergy between dust, pollution, and biological aerosols using increasingly refined equations. In recent years, and as industrial emissions in certain parts of the world have dipped, at least compared to the peaks of the 20th century, some scientists believe that the relative contribution from forests and phytoplankton is becoming more apparent. With fewer pollutants swirling in the air, these biological forces stand out. By clarifying exactly how many new aerosol particles each type of living entity can produce, and at which altitudes, scientists hope to make climate models more accurate than ever before. This matters a great deal everywhere, but especially in regions where large-scale phenomena such as monsoons or frequent cloud cover can drastically affect local farming, fisheries, and cultures. Neither is it as simple as more clouds means more cooling. The world of clouds is nuanced, with varied shapes and altitudes, each reflecting or trapping different amounts of heat. It is precisely because of this complexity that some climate models disagree about how strong a cooling effect these biological aerosols can have. For instance, in a recent comparison, some models saw a dramatic cooling due to natural vapors and aerosols, while others indicated only a tiny effect. This discrepancy underscores just how critical it is to refine our understanding, so that we can predict environmental transformations in the next 10, 20, or even 50 years with a greater level of precision. Let us add yet another layer of intrigue: geoengineering. You may have heard about seemingly futuristic proposals to brighten clouds artificially, or to infuse the stratosphere with reflective particles in a desperate attempt to cool the planet if global warming trends become too intense. Such schemes are controversial, as they might carry unintended consequences. Imagine changing cloud patterns in ways that reduce rainfall or produce unusual storms in certain regions. By studying the role of natural aerosols, atmospheric scientists might glean insights that help them predict what would happen if we intentionally tinkered with the atmosphere. If we do not understand how ocean particles or forest vapors behave up in the sky, how could we possibly forecast the fallout from radical geoengineering proposals? This is one reason why researchers are fine-tuning their models. Consider the notion of reforesting vast stretches of land. Beyond simply absorbing carbon dioxide, new forests might expel aromatic chemicals that transform into aerosol seeds, generating more clouds overhead. While trees can also absorb more heat than grasslands, particularly because their foliage can be darker in color, the net effect of enhanced cloud cover might counterbalance that warming. This synergy could tip the scales in our favor if thoroughly understood. In May of this year, a modeling study suggested that the climate benefits of large-scale tree restoration might be bigger than we suspected, exactly because new forests would moderate temperatures not just by removing carbon dioxide, but also by amping up aerosol-driven cloud formation. Meanwhile, the story does not end where land meets sea. The ocean is arguably the largest participant in this ongoing conversation. Think, for instance, about how waves churn and break. With each crash, little droplets fling upward, carrying pockets of the microscopic life that thrive in the watery soup. Some researchers refer to it affectionately as the sea's gunk, a potent mixture of proteins, fats, leftover DNA from dead microbes, and who knows what else. At first glance, it is unthinkable that this ephemeral spume would shape something as large as the weather, but all that organic matter can bind with water in ways that encourage ice crystals to form in the sky at less brutal temperatures. With countless storms swirling across the wide expanse of ocean each year, the potential for these biologically charged droplets to shape Earth's cloud distribution is vast. Let us recall the on-the-ground, or rather above-the-ground, experiences of Martin Heinrizi once more. Perched in a plane zipping only 1,000 feet above the Great Barrier Reef, strapped into a seat next to sensors designed to measure gases so infinitesimally small they might otherwise go unnoticed, Heinrizi gazed out at the horizon, scanning for changes in conditions. All the while, intangible exhalations from phytoplankton rose from below, crossing the invisible threshold between water and air, drifting into the atmosphere to mix with other molecules. Perhaps the plane then ascended to 5,000 or even 40,000 feet, capturing samples at various altitudes, tracing how those gases combine, where they cluster, and how they seed invisible condensation. The entire process glimmers with the sense of scientific magic, bridging the magnificent gap between the reef and the sky. There is a reason that emerging scientists across multiple disciplines are enthralled by this new knowledge. It upends older assumptions about global warming, painting life not just as a victim of climate change, but as a potential protagonist in the planetary story. Does this mean life itself might rescue us from the worst-case scenarios? Researchers caution us against unrestrained optimism. After all, phytoplankton do not exist purely to cool the planet, and these processes can be thrown off balance by ocean acidification, pollution, or rising sea temperatures that devastate coral reefs and plankton communities. In other words, the more we appreciate the intricate role that living organisms play in cloud formation, the clearer it becomes just how vulnerable that protective effect might be if we continue to disrupt our global ecosystems. Yet complexity need not be a disheartening concept. In fact, it introduces a sense of wonder. When we think of clouds, we might picture drifting pillows of vapor overhead or heavy thunderheads that drop torrents of rain. But now, we must imagine something else as well. An entire swirl of living processes, webs of collaboration among the ocean, the forests, and the atmosphere, all culminating in that fleeting, intangible shape overhead. Scientists have become the detectives of this swirling puzzle, collecting clues from the chemical composition of airborne particles, analyzing the behaviors of clouds and data from satellites, and rewriting entire textbooks along the way. Perhaps you have felt that rush of amazement at how everything on this planet is connected, from the subtle fragrance of pine needles in the forest to a gurgling bloom of algae beneath the waves, and eventually to the sky that shepherds our climate. If this moment has you feeling as though you have stumbled upon a secret code, you may wish to show some love by giving a friendly thumbs up or hitting that subscribe button. It really does help us delve deeper into these or other complex topics in the future. Yes, at times all this talk of climate modeling and microphysics can seem daunting, but it also holds the promise of forging better methods to predict storms, manage resources, and craft smarter policies. The challenge is formidable. We need to refine existing models so they can incorporate the messiness we have uncovered. It is no longer enough to say dust plus sulfuric acid plus water equals clouds. Today we know that isoprene from trees or proteins from sea spray can either enhance or disrupt the entire chain of events by which aerosols form and seeds for clouds develop. In one study, simply adding a pinch of certain rare plant vapors caused cloud formation to double. That result alone points to a world of uncharted territory still waiting to be explored. By cultivating a more elegant grasp of how biology interacts with climate, we might avoid some nasty surprises. For instance, if an important microbial population in the ocean collapses due to warming temperatures or acidification, could that undermine a major source of cloud-seeding particles, thereby leaving certain regions hotter? Alternatively, if we restore large tracts of tropical rainforest, might we see more local cloud cover with a partial offset to extremes of heat? The answers to these questions hinge on ongoing research by interdisciplinary teams, bridging the fields of marine biology, atmospheric chemistry, ecology, and computational science. Inside the lab, the puzzle pieces slowly come together. A snippet of algae excretes a sulfur-based gas. That gas meanders upward and, under the right chemical conditions, becomes a shiny aerosol droplet. Meanwhile, a meteorologist on the ground sees patterns in satellite imagery that might confirm an unusual bloom of phytoplankton off the coast. A climate modeler tries plugging new equations into a global simulation to account for the plankton's effect on clouds. Then the prediction shifts slightly for rainfall patterns or temperature distribution. Multiply that process by countless such investigations around the globe, and you begin to see how the tapestry of climate science is being rewoven by these discoveries. To be sure, the road ahead is brimming with challenges. How do we isolate each factor behind cloud formation when literally dozens of processes converge at once? Is the same pattern we see over the Great Barrier Reef also replicated above the North Atlantic or the Indian Ocean? Will the diminishing of pollutants in some regions expose the world to more intense warming if we lose a certain subset of aerosols but fail to preserve the natural forms that can offset them? Sometimes the deeper we go into such questions, the more complicated they become. Yet it is only through the slow, patient pursuit of knowledge and elegantly orchestrated experiments that we can hope to glean clarity and perhaps guide policy decisions that will steer us clear of environmental catastrophes. Martin Heinrich's flights over the reef offer merely one window into this grand puzzle. Zoom out, and you discover that entire teams are measuring sea spray in the Arctic, scanning forest canopies in the Amazon, or tinkering with the atmospheric recipes in the carefully managed cloud chambers of CERN. All these threads converge to paint a portrait of nature as a living composer, pressing hidden keys that shape our planet's temperature and climate. This also means that a variety of solutions exist if we can preserve or even strengthen the healthy interactions between life and sky. Forest conservation, reforestation, safeguarding marine ecosystems, and regulating industrial activity are no longer separate issues from climate science. They fold into a single, intertwined story. When we think about climate solutions, we must recall that life is not just a passenger on this planet, but one of its grand orchestrators. It is humbling to imagine that for so long, we might have overlooked this biological nuance. Many of us were taught that climate was largely about greenhouse gases and the ozone layer, with perhaps a vague mention of soot and aerosols. But the new wave of science is telling us that the planet breathes in more ways than we ever suspected, and that we are entwined with the ocean waters and forest canopies that seem so far removed from our daily routines. As we watch the first rays of morning light dance on the edge of a cloud, we might now pause in awe, reminded that somewhere, an algae bloom or a stand of pines helped shape this ephemeral tapestry. This is not mere poetry. It is an evolving scientific truth, hammered out by carefully calibrated instruments, data analysis, and a dogged pursuit of answers to the question, how does life sculpt the sky? And perhaps, just as importantly, how can we harness that knowledge? The next era of climate models will be more than just bigger or faster versions of their predecessors. They will be deeper and more intricately laced with the complexities of living systems, bridging microphysical phenomena with macro-level patterns in ways that just might surprise us all. So the next time you look up on a balmy day, pondering the brilliance of the clouds, think of them not as passive lumps of vapor, but as epic collaborations with the living realm. And if that idea ignites your curiosity, consider sticking around for future deep dives. There are still uncharted realms to explore, whether in the hidden corners of ocean biology or the chemical intricacies of forest fragrances that swirl overhead. We are living in a time of unprecedented discovery, and the sky, which once seemed deceptively simple, appears more alive than ever.